it needs to feel as custom and as hand-touched as our previous games, because the gamer is not going to accept a step backwards there. They don't want to pay the price for our innovation. We have to pay the price for the innovation. They don't know it's built in any different way. They just feel the game is responding to them, and they're giving options way beyond what they had before. She's a fairly dark and complex character. I tend to write characters are a little darker. We decided to take an approach which is more about building these sort of modular elements that are very handcrafted, and could the game build spaces, build narrative, build events out of those small elements if you gave it a good rule set. When I was playing Lego when I was a kid, there's only like 8 or 9 primal pieces you had. You had the 4x4 brick and the 2x6 brick or whatever. And you could build so many things out of those handcrafted primal pieces. So we just had built thousands and thousands and thousands of different primal pieces. We track the player's activity and try to react to it on a much lower level than you get out of a branching tree structure. Games journalists became more political because they felt they were involved in something bigger, and more important than just games. And I never had that feeling. Like, I always was so excited to be in games. They would sort of torment like poor developers and say, your game's political, isn't it? And the poor developer who wasn't really thinking politically would be like, no, it's not. And but it is, because, and my games have always pretty much been political, and I never denied that.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. I'm your host, Pete Pischke, and today's episode is set to be a showstopper. Joining me is Ken Levine, the visionary behind the BIOSHOCK'S series and president of Ghost Story Games. His storytelling and world building have captivated millions, me included, and continues to influence game design today. In this episode, we'll explore Ken's career, from System Shock 2 to the haunting depths of Rapture in the heights of Columbia. We'll discuss his passion for theater, his background as a screenwriter, and how the arts shape his game design. Plus, we will have some insights into his innovative narrative Legos concept and talk a little bit about his upcoming 2025 game, Judas. So get ready for a toe-tapping journey into the mind of one of the gaming's most influential creators. So welcome to the show, Ken.
Thank you, Peter. I've enjoyed listening to a bunch of your episodes, and I know it took a while to get back to you about coming on, but I've been looking forward to this.
Ken, you take as much time as you want. I got to tell you, last year you were very kind when I reached out to see if you'd be interested on the show. Little did I because I never am in my wildest dreams to think that Ken Levine would come back a year later and be like, Pete, I have to go on your show. If I don't go on your show, Pete, I'll just die in the desert, no water.
It's true. I wouldn't have made it. You have a lot of big. I mean, what I like about your guest list is extremely eclectic. Like, they're all sides, like politics, political spectrum, game people, non-game people. Yeah, I never really know who you're going to have on. There's been a bunch of really interesting episodes I heard.
Yeah, I did not plan it to be like that, but that is very much my personality. So,
is YouTube your primary? Is that your primary place? That's right.
Yeah, the YouTube. That seems to be where my audience seems to do best. But this also goes out on the podcast for those that prefer audio listening. Like they're doing their dishes or driving the car or whatever, walking the dog. Well, Ken, in the process, to the audience, so you should know. So in the process of setting this up, we kind of came to the agreement that Ken, because he started in theater, Ken would like to talk about theater and how that's influenced him. And so I, dear viewers, not coming from theater, I was not a theater kid. I was a chorus kid. I went to the chorus. I didn't go to theater. So I've spent, I don't know if you're familiar with SpongeBob SquarePants, but in one of the season 1 or 2 episodes, episode where Mr. Krabs wants to make his dining establishment fine dining, and SpongeBob in it, to get ready to psych himself out, he goes into his mind, he says, forget everything but fine dining and breathing. So, Ken, that has been me for the last 2-3 weeks. I have just watched like everything I could get on Sondheim. I've read everything I can on.
Yeah, God, so excited.
So I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
With Sondheim, like, did that work for you, or was that just too? He can be pretty weird.
I mostly enjoyed it. There were a few ones that are like, okay, it's a little out there. There's a little out there stuff.
What did you see?
Oh, I watched. I saw. I mostly focused, of course, on like his 10 biggest hits. So I looked up on Google. 10 most popular Sondheim shows. So I saw like, of course, I've seen West Side Story. I saw Follies. I saw. Oh goodness gracious.
Where can you watch Follies?
I did watch Follows. I like Follows a lot.
No, where can you watch it? Is it on video? You can watch it.
You have to. The people at the Sondheim Reddit know all the best licit and illicit
I got it.
means of acquiring Sondheim material.
I'm totally not going to bug you afterwards to find out where you found these, so don't.
I watched a lot of Sondheim. I really liked Sunday in the Park with George. That was excellent.
Who was George in the version you saw? Was it Mandy Patinkin?
I couldn't tell you. I'm not good with names. It was very good though. I was saw what's the one? It's about the famous actress and about her mother. Oh, mother crazy. I know this one. Come on, Peter. Come on, brain.
Oh, you're talking about. Wait, what are you? I don't know. What are you talking about?
About actress, mom. I can do it. Gypsy.
Oh, right. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
I think he just wrote lyrics for that, or did he write the? Did he write the music?
He was just a lyricist, yeah, because that was in his younger days. Because that's kind of how he got started. Because I learned he trained under Hammerstein. Yeah. And then he did lyrics, and was like, I want to do music too. I was like, want to be a lyricist.
As a kid, he was Hammerstein's neighbor in Bucks County, and he just sort of took him under his wing, despite snap.
As they do.
Well, I got very lucky. I met when I was working. So I went to college, and I didn't know what to do during the summer, so I just stayed near the college. I got a job as a busboy near the college, and I was like the worst busboy. I've been fired. I think I've been a busboy 3 times. I've been fired from all 3 jobs. So I got fired from the busboy job in 2 weeks for being an asshole, and I got a job at the summer theater that they were doing at Vassar at school as a carpenter, and I met a playwright there. He's fairly well known. He's still reasonably well known and does TV shows and stuff. And he took to me, and he got me my first agent too. So I also lucked out. But if I hadn't got fired from that busboy job, who knows where I'd be?
Yeah, I your background listening to interviews with you is very interesting, because I kind of felt I was similar in that I felt very isolated growing up as a child and a teen, and so finding vocation or finding more purpose later on in a field. For you, that was theater and screenwriting and the arts. And I had a very similar experience. That kind of was that way with me with my interest in journalism. And I really did relate to that. But it surprised people, because it may be in retrospect, if they played your games, BioShock or especially Infinite, that you actually come from the world of theater. But I don't think a lot of people actually know that. And it's very untraditional for big and auteur game developers.
Yeah, I mean, the games are very theatrical. I remember we were making, during BioShock, we were making the "Would You Kindly" scene with Andrew Ryan, and you see his office, and if you look at that scene, it's a very theatrical. Originally, the office was very realistic looking, and I actually pointed the artist towards a bunch of theater set design books, because theater sets are very suggestive rather than literal. Quite often, sometimes they are. They're getting more. The bigger ones are more literal now, but back in the day, you didn't really try to go for realism in theater set design. So I pushed the artist away from a realistic office and more like one that feels like a set. And Ryan is very much in a spotlight. Even when you come into the scene, the stage where he is dark, his office, and you're in the light, and then the light comes down, the house lights go down on you and comes up on him. And it's very, he does a monologue then, right? A soliloquy. Monologue, actually, technically. And but I would have done it if I hadn't been a theater person. I don't know if that scene would have existed. Certainly not in that form. I would have probably taken a very different approach. But I think theater, because theater, similar to you have to draw the eye on theater in a way you don't have to in film, because in film you can just do a close up, or a 2-shot, or whatever you do. Where in theater, the viewer's sitting there and you have to draw their attention. So you use lighting and upstage and downstage. You have to use those tools extensively. And games, similarly, we don't, especially the games I make, we don't force the camera. The player's in control of the camera. The player is the cameraman when they play first-person shooters. And so you have to use a lot of similar techniques about lighting isolation and color isolation, and how far away it is from you versus things that are closer, or you're more likely to see them things that are further. So I took a lot from theater design and set design and just that whole experience of directing plays that I learned, doing theater.
Yeah, I was listening to a discussion, and they had one of the engineer team that worked on Elizabeth for Infinite, and the way they described it basically was that they were kind of using the concept of blocking, that they kind of use almost blocking like you do in theater to kind of guide you towards Elizabeth, and it's in with that screen. Then she has all these pathways for objects she sees, and then she has different emotional states, and then you get kind of a mix of tap that pathway. Oh, she's in a certain emotional state. Now we have a certain outcome, which kind of goes into we'll go into your narrative Legos idea later on. But it is interesting, I think, actually, once I was looking into this, how much of that theater worldview or design, how you approach the art, is just kind of really intrinsic to the games you've made. I don't know if that was intentional of yours, but it is interesting how that's kind of all wrapped around you.
I don't think, I guess it's intentional to decide I chose to use theatrical stuff, but I think that it's just, it's especially when you're young, you're in chorus, I'm sure that formed you in a certain way, right? When you're young, you're clay, and the people around you and the things you bump into form you. Like, I came into theater truly as an accident. I originally wasn't in the creative side. I went to this like fancy arts camp, and the reason I went is I went because my sister had gone, and my mom said to me, look, at this camp, you don't have to go, you can go from whatever activity to whatever activity whenever you want to at any time. And for me, I hated being told what to do. So I ended up going to this camp, even though I had no interest in the arts per se. I like comic books, like Dungeons and Dragons, but I wasn't really, and I grew up with theater because my mom, used to take me to Broadway shows, and they would listen to every show on their 8-track tape in the car. So I knew all these shows really well. But when I was at this camp, I didn't really know what to do. And I just ended up sort of bumping into the sound design people, the theatrical sound design people. They were really nice, and they kind of invited me to come check it out, and ended up doing like sound design, which, back then was really just, it was like reel-to-reel tapes and stuff. And so it was really just doing, cues for various, plays. Like, okay, the alarm bell has to go off. So, you sit there with this 8-track tape player, and you've got an alarm from some stock library, and you hit play, and you play the alarm sound, and you stop it, and it's carrying a lot of heavy speakers around. And so I was just in the technical side at first, and then one day there was a talent show or something. I said, well, what if I had been reading plays, good for the plays we were putting on plays, but I wasn't creatively involved. But then I was like, well, I'll write a play. And I just sat down and in 1 hour wrote this 1-act play. And it was such an amazing experience. I'd never written before, really. And it was such a powerful experience to write something. And it's like, I described it before. It's like, those dreams you find a part of your house that you didn't know existed, like a new room in your house or something. It kind of felt like that. Like, I didn't know this was here. And then, very quickly, people started responding to my writing. And frankly, as a kid, there wasn't much I did that anybody really responded to. Like, I wasn't very popular, and I didn't really have any particular talents. I wasn't athletic. For many years, I had a speech impediment, which, made I was almost impossible to understand. My brother had to translate for me, and obviously that didn't make me super popular, and I didn't have a ton of friends. And then finding that I could do something, that people responded to is pretty powerful.
How old were you?
I must have been around 14 or 15 at this point, 13, probably 14, 15, yeah. And, I really hadn't had anything before. Like, I used to draw, I'd read Spider-Man, and I would copy frames, but I couldn't draw. I had no musical ability. I really didn't have anything, that I thought made me, special at all. So it was really cool to find something I could do.
I can relate. I do enjoy all those things. I enjoy comics and reading science fiction. I can't draw either. So you're not alone in that.
You can sing, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
I can't sing, so I'm jealous.
No, thank you. That was pretty cool. I mean, it's awesome that clicked. And so you eventually did follow that, and you went into college, and you decided to major in drama. Is that right?
Yeah, it seemed easier than, I was not a great student either, so it seemed easier than a lot of other things, and I was interested in it. but there wasn't much at college. There really was almost no writing courses. So I took a lot of acting and set design, and, I'm an okay, I've acted in a couple of games and stuff. I don't think that's my best feature, but, so I didn't do much. So the only writing I did really wasn't really in the context of my classes, in context of there was a thing at the school called the Philaletheia Society. And I don't even know what that's a reference to, some Greek word. And you could basically get like $50 from the school to put on a play, like a really amateur play. And they give you a location on the school. And so I wrote and put on a bunch of plays at school. And I directed or a friend of mine would direct it. And sometimes I was in them. But I really liked that. And it really taught me a ton of things about becoming an entrepreneur, because when you're directing a play or producing a play at school, you're around with a bunch of students. You're not paying anybody because there's no money, right? It's just a bunch of, young people want to act, get a chance to act or something. And they're all busy and they're all rather, people aren't got parties, they have classes, they have exams, and you have to get them to the rehearsals and, and sweet talk them into doing stuff that they may not otherwise want to do. And they all have to show up and learn their lines, and you put on a play. And that was a great experience. I got to put my stuff in front of an audience, and that was always really powerful. And I do miss the one thing about games that's harder. It's much better now with Let's Plays and stuff like that. But back in the day, you really didn't see your people interacting with your work at all, back in the early days. And I miss those opening nights, I'm sure you've had this, when you're doing chorus or whatever, you hear the audience coming in and, and you can hear a reaction in real time from something you did, whether it's applause or laughter. I used to write a lot of sort of comedy stuff. And so, getting laughter was always such a great reaction. And I found it very powerful, but I learned so much from doing that, that it really helped me once I became an entrepreneur. When we started Irrational, that I had a fair amount of experience of trying to get people to do things when you had almost no money and no experience, and, and have them try to work together, create a creative project and a shared vision.
Yeah. In my understanding experience, people who are attracted to the arts, it's a little bit like trying to herd cats, dramatic cats.
Yeah. Yeah. And not everybody is as, it's your play. So, not every actor is going to be as committed. And, I did plays in college. We did 2 plays after college, and one of them I directed and one I didn't. And, you have people at that point, people had jobs and stuff, and getting them to come to these rehearsals. And then, it was very difficult.
Yeah. But you're right. That was good practice for the future. So you eventually, somehow you tried your hand at screenwriting for a while. You were trying to do the Hollywood thing. How did that happen? And I know that's not always your favorite. That wasn't always the favorite time of your life to reflect on, but I am interested to hear
Yeah, well, I'll tell you about it. So I met, as I said, I got fired. So I was working at my college just by chance, and I had this job. I got fired. I went to work at the summer theater as a carpenter, which I was also not very good at, but working 14 hours a day, building sets and stuff. But there was this writer named John Robin Bates, who was, I think in residency, and one of his plays was being put on at the summer theater. And it's a pretty, I think that they still do it. I think it's called the Power Half Summer Theater. So it's still a pretty high end, a lot of reasonably well-known actors, would show up. And but I met this writer, and he agreed to read one of the plays I'd written, because I'd written at that point a whole bunch of plays. And he really liked it, or at least he said he did. And I just remember saying to him, and by the way, I came this close to not going to meet him because I was hungover, because I was, I was a college kid, and I woke up in the morning, I had this headache, and I had a bike to the campus, and it was because I was staying off campus, and it was 95 degrees out, and my head was killing me. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to do it. And then if I dragged myself to do it, and we talked, and he said, your play's this, and he talked about the characters and the story, and blah, blah, blah. And then finally I said, well, how do I make money doing this? Because I didn't have any money at all. And my parents were never going to, even if they could, were never going to support me in a theatrical career. And he said, well, I can send it to my agent in LA and see what she thinks. And he did. And she was interested enough to sort of informally take me on. She didn't sign me, but she sort of informed me. And she sent and she said, you got to write a screenplay. And I said, okay, having no idea what a screenplay was really. And I took a play I had written, and put on at Vassar actually. and one of those $50 plays. And I turned to a screenplay. It wasn't even really a screenplay. It was like 60. If you know anything about screenplays, it was like 60 pages long. The formatting was all wrong. It was all dialogue, where movies are about much more about visuals and visual storytelling. And I didn't know anything about visual storytelling back then. Nothing. I didn't even know what people were talking about. They said, "Oh, film is a visual medium." I'm like, well, I don't know, because I had seen films, but I didn't really understand how the visual language film worked at all. And so I wrote this thing, but even though it was completely like amateurish, there was enough heart in it, I guess, where the agent liked it, and she, sent me out to get. She pitched me to a bunch of like film executives, I guess, around Hollywood at the time, and one of them at Paramount agreed to fly me out from my college to go to LA when I was like 20 or something, maybe 20 at most.
Yeah.
And maybe I was younger. I can't. Was it? No, I must have been 19 or 20. And but they flew me out. They flew me out first class, and I'd barely been on a plane before, and I still remember, like, they had like a lobster and stuff, and I stayed, and I went out to like the hotel in LA, and I didn't know that you were supposed to like have a credit card and like pay for your room, and they were going to reimburse you. And I didn't have a credit card that could afford, that could put that much money on it. And so like I had to stay, so I couldn't stay at the hotel. And I remember her assistant, the agent's assistant, let me stay at her place and on her couch. And that was my first time in LA. And I went down to all these fancy meetings and stuff. And eventually I got a job writing a screenplay for Paramount, doing a rewrite of some romantic comedy of theirs. And that I got right after college. I got that right after the writer's strike, because when I got to college, there was a writer's strike, and then I got this gig, and that was super exciting. Except it was like exactly not the kind of movie I knew how to write, like a romantic comedy. I had no idea how to write a romantic comedy, and it didn't go well. And so my film career basically stopped almost as soon as it started. And I tried, I wrote a whole bunch of screenplays to try to get people interested. I wrote like 5, 6, 7 screenplays, and just I couldn't get anybody interested. And eventually I just sort of said, well, I guess I'm not going to have a creative career. And I went away and did other things until I was like 29, and I decided to apply for a job in the games industry.
I feel for young Ken. I mean, I've been there. I've worked on things, and you feel like you're on a hot streak, and everyone loves you, and people respect your emails. Oh yeah, everyone's friendly and nice. They want to be your buddy, and then the popularity wears off, and then the responses just don't come anymore. And I've been in that situation. It sucks. It is dreadful.
It's so cold. Like I remember, like my agent. Well, for my agent, like, I called the agency when my career started falling apart, and she had left and gone to Disney, but didn't tell me. And so I just suddenly had no agent, and she didn't tell me she was leaving. I never heard from her again. When you're not in Hollywood, it is not a friendly town if nobody has any interest in you. So yeah, it was hard, man. It was hard. I got really depressed when that didn't work out, because I kind of felt like I was this wunderkind who was like, destined to, be successful, because I was a young writer. I'd won these writing, some writing contests, and I got this agent when I was really young, and then all of a sudden, all gone. And I was just like out of it. And it was hard. It was really hard.
So what convinced you to take another shot at writing again? Because that's kind of what you ultimately did end up doing when you got in the games industry, though that I'm sure that wasn't what you thought was going to happen.
Yeah, so I basically stopped doing creative things for a few years, and I became like a computer consultant. And I had a small, like, I started my own like tiny business, and fix people's Macintoshes, which I enjoyed, but it wasn't like super fulfilling. And then a friend of mine, that was probably from like 22 to like 26, 4 years of just that. And then but I was still living in LA, so it's really hard, because you go by the studios that you used to be like, invited in the front door, and now you couldn't, it was like, oh, I remember that place when I used to, I used to be a screenwriter. And but then a friend of mine raised some money to put on a play in Idaho at this college during the summer, and he's like, how about you write a play? Because I knew we used to put on plays in college together, and So my friend Will said, why don't you do a play? And I wrote so I said, okay. And I wrote a play, and I went out there for 3 weeks, and he directed it and put it on, and it was really exciting and really exhilarating and felt great to have an audience again and do all of that. And then I came back from that. I was like, okay, I'm moving to New York and become a playwright. And then I moved to New York, and I was about 27, and I tried to put on a play, which we did, and it didn't go super well. And I realized there's absolutely no money in theater. Like, unless you're like, there's very few people who make money in theater, but as a straight playwright, I don't mean straight versus gay, I mean straight, like they call straight plays versus musical theater, right? Straight plays are like just dialogue, dialogue and stuff. And there's no money in that. And there's very few straight plays being put on. If they are, it's really, and you can't really live on that. And so I was in New York I was working all day, and then putting on, directing a play at night, and I was living in this disgusting apartment with this pathological liar. It was not a great time. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's not going to be it. I guess I'm not going to be a playwright. And then I was like, well, what's left? And I'm like, well, I've been a gamer my entire life. I love games, and I never stopped playing games. I had consoles. I had finally just bought a PC because I could finally just afford one, because I only had a Macintosh for my consulting work. But there was like no games on the Macintosh back then, and they were terrible. There was a few games, but they were not very good. And then I remember, I'm like, well, what if I got a job in the games industry? But I had no idea what that job was. Like, I didn't even know, like, what is it? I didn't know that people like made games. Right? I never really thought about it. Like, you just get this disc and there's a game on it. And I'm like, whoa, what's that about? And I saw an ad in this magazine for a game design job at a company called Looking Glass. And I had played Looking Glass games. Ultima, Underworld, and System Shock were huge games for me, System Shock 1. And they had an ad for a game designer. I'm like, well, that sounds unspecified enough, or maybe I could do that. And I applied. I applied for a few game jobs at that point, but I hadn't heard nothing back, and I applied, and that was by far the place I would love to work at most. And I completely lucked out, because they called me up and said, we'd like to fly you up to Boston and do an interview. And I went out, I did the interview, and it went really well. And a week later, they called me, told me I had the job. And a month later, I moved up to Boston.
Yeah, Looking Glass Studios back in the heyday.
Yep.
When you were there, because you weren't even, I don't think you were there that long. You were there like a year, maybe?
I was a year and a half, yeah.
You were there while they were working on legendary classic PC game Thief.
Yes. I was super lucky again. Like, I had a bunch of lucky breaks. Success in life is like being ready when luck comes around, right? And I was pretty ready. But I was also super lucky, because I got put in a room with sort of their key creative guy, Doug Church, to come up with, Looking Glass would say, how they decide what the next games were. They didn't say we're doing this game. They would say, we want to do an action RPG, we want to do an RPG, and we want to do a flight sim. And then they would sort of leave it up to people on the team to figure out. And those are the business people deciding what those were. And I remember, like, the head, Paul Neroth, used to write on a whiteboard, the timeline of the upcoming years and what we'd be doing. And some of those games ended up happening, some not happening. But this was just called Action RPG at the time. And Doug, I don't know why they put me in a room with Doug, given I was like the newest guy there. But Doug and I got put in a room together, and he and I just started beating around ideas. And, we went through like 5, 6, 7 different whole games. And I would go off like game ideas, and I'd go off and we talk about ideas, and he'd say, okay, go off and write it up. And I go and I write up like a 5 to 10 page document, which is a whole game concept with the setting, the characters, the core mechanics, even the key commands and stuff like that for the PC. And then I'd bring it back to him, and he'd look at it, we'd talk about it for a while, and then he'd say, I don't know, I'm not really feeling it. And it was heartbreaking the first few times this happened, right? Because I would spend like a week or 2 weeks, coming up with this thing, and I was working obsessively on them, to all hours of the night. And, I'd have to go around Looking Glass and find artists who I can convince to do some concept art for my little pitch, while they're doing all their other tasks. And so it's sort of like being back in school when you had to convince people, to be in your play. So I'd talk to Mark Lazat or Rob Waters, who are great artists there, and they would do some concept work for me. And then I go back to Doug and I show him the next thing, and he'd say, I don't know, it's not really working for me. And we went back and forth on this. And at first it was discouraging, but then I sort of realized this is what you do, right? Writing isn't writing, it's rewriting. Ideas are a dime a dozen. If you're going to really choose something and commit like years of your life to it, you want to really be sure. So, but eventually the head of the studio, Paul Neurath, came in and he said, because we had all these crazy ideas, like there was a game called Better Red Than Undead, which is like a zombie Cold War thriller. And there was like a thing called School of Wizards. There was Dark Elves Must Die. There's a kung fu game called Split Knuckle. There's a whole bunch of games. They're all really different from each other. The only thing they had in common was we had this idea that how AIs would function in one aspect of them, which is, in Thief, I don't know if you remember, but as a stealth game, enemies did, like a lot of back then in the days of first-person shooters, if an enemy saw you, they would attack you, right? No matter how, if they entered, they didn't have fancy detection. They just oh, there he is, I see him, I'm going to attack. We sort of came up with this whole idea of like enemies seeing you and saying, hey, is somebody there? In the distance before they were sure. And, in Thief, they would sort of go and they look for somebody and, they'd search around. And that was a really interesting concept we came up because it made the enemies, it gave you a level of interaction with them, like avoiding them, which you didn't do in a purely combat first-person shooter. And that was sort of, and then we started kicking around ideas of like, how can the player navigate the, do you know Thief?
I do. I did play the original some. I did not play the sequels, and then I did play the new Thief. Well, it's not new anymore at this point, but
no, it's like, yeah, it's really old now. Even like the most recent one. But you get the basic idea, like it's a stealth game, and I drew a lot of ideas from actually like other genres, like submarine games, where we drew a lot of the ideas from, because submarine games are about managing your visibility, essentially, right? And a submarine, when it's undetected, is massively powerful, and when it's detected, it's extremely weak, which is different than like most first-person shooters, where you're just sort of, you're just powerful, and and you lose health and everything, but you're not really differently powerful at different times. Where in a stealth game, we really like the idea of you feeling terrified when you got detected, but feeling really on top of the world when you were undetected. And so we had these ideas, and then the head of the studio, Paul Neurath, came in one day and he said, "Well, what if you made a game about a thief? Because it's an action RPG." And we're like, well, people make games about fighters and wizards, and I think there was one game at that time I never played it, called Keith the Thief, and that was the only game I had ever heard about a thief. I don't think it was particularly stealth oriented. It was like a VGA game in like 1992 or something. But this worked really well with our variable, degrees of enemy awareness idea. And so, we started coming up with other ideas like, arrows that can put out light sources, right? So you can remain more undetected, and arrows that can deaden sound, and noisemakers, and all these other things that could help you manipulate your sort of awareness environment. And that was really fun. But yeah, I had been working on that and sort of helped kick that off. And then the other project I was working on there got canceled. It was a Star Trek game. And I just felt the company, it was like the best company to start your career at, because it was like, you learn something every day. And the people there were so insanely smart. And I'm so grateful for how much I learned there. But I was also concerned, I'd been an entrepreneur, so I was concerned. I knew from my own company kinds of behaviors that happened when money was scarce. And I got very nervous that that company would shut down and I'd just be out of a job. And my thought is, well, if I lose this job, am I ever going to get other jobs in the game industry? Or am I going to go back to having to be a computer consultant, which is, was kind of depressing, even though it's not a bad job. I did like it. It was just not what my dream was. And so I got this crazy idea that the only rational thing to do is start my own company with two other fellow Looking Glass people, which was kind of insane because none of us had a ton of, two of us had never shipped a game. and one of them had, Rob Fermi had, and John Che and I hadn't. And none of us had ever really run a business on that scale before. Like when I ran my business, I was the only employee of the company. But we sort of had this crazy idea, and we sort of decided, okay, well, I'm going to be the president, and I'm going to handle the business. You're going to be the treasurer, and you're going to handle the finances, and you're going to be the, this, that. And we divided up all the tasks, creative tasks and the business tasks. And we, pitched stuff around. We got our first gig, which literally got canceled in 3 weeks. And so that didn't last very long, and I was heartbroken again. And I thought, okay, that's it. Now you've really done it. You quit your job, you failed, and it's all over. But then we got a call from Paul Rath, the head of Looking Glass, and he's like, hey, you guys know the Dark engine, which is the engine we had used for Thief. Would you like to do another game on the engine so we can amortize the cost across multiple projects? And we were like, sure, does it pay? And then he's like, not very much, but yeah, sure, a little bit. And we got paid this sort of basically slave wages to start doing a prototype for the thing that became System Shock 2.
Yeah, which was it was critically successful. It just
sold 5 copies, yes. Yeah, sold 5. I had a long history of games that were critically successful, but did not sell.
I think that's I appreciate getting into the history some, because I think that it's kind of important to kind of understand, because I think, especially if you listen to the gaming press, which many members of aren't always your biggest fans, let's put it that way. I think sometimes people forget a lot, like, because I think a lot of people look at game development sometimes in a very unrealistic thing, and they don't kind of see all the layers it took to get to there. You don't just start Ken Levine, mastermind, game developer, creating BioShock out of nothing. You had all these failures, all this training, all this time, all these other people that, some of them who I think still work with you even today at Ghost Story Games, which is interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
So I think people, it's good. I found this often with other guys. It's good to know a little bit of that history, because it gives you the context. It gives you the appropriate appreciation for the person, but also what it requires to meet those levels. Because I'm just speaking for myself. Some of us would like to do things like you do, Ken, but many of us don't want to put in the work necessarily. And I say that I'm a little lazy.
It is like the first 10 years of Irrational were just brutal. Like just keeping the company going, because you had to make payroll every month, and we weren't, we were a private company. And when a milestone was laid, you often hear, especially young developers, you can often see this on new developers when they start a company. Like, this is how our company's going to work. It's going to be, everything's going to be, everybody's going to hold hands, sing hallelujah, and we're never going to work hard. We're never going to work more than 40 hours a week, and it's going to be great. And the problem is when you're doing it on a milestone basis, we're working on a milestone basis, you get paid you don't get paid when you deliver something. You get paid when you deliver it, and it's approved by the publisher to their arbitrary objective standard. So if a publisher's not honest, they will often just get more and more and more work out of you, and you have to do it because by that point, you're so financially stretched that you have no other choice. Like, it's either shut down the company or, well, what are we doing this weekend? I guess we're working on the milestone, because otherwise the company's going out of business. It was really hard, really fucking hard. And look, there may be people, sometimes when I hear people who say these things, maybe they have an ability I don't have, which is just to make every decision perfectly and to never make mistakes and to understand, and never have run into technology problems, never run into, the kind of situation you run into when you have a small company. But okay, the office manager quits one day, all of a sudden, and stops returning phone calls, and you look in her drawer in her desk, and there's unpaid bills from the last 8 months in there that she never paid. And you thought you had a certain financial position, all of a sudden you realize she hasn't paid any of the bills, and the accounting's all off, and people quit, or people have personal problems. Sometimes you come to the office and some guy threw a punch at another guy, right? Some guy is selling drugs out of the office, and we found out. Some guy has started his own business using office equipment, and it's like a web page up running on our server. It is kind of hell. And I don't miss being an entrepreneur, but that was the price I paid to be able to be a creative director, because nobody was going to make me creative director, right? I wasn't experienced enough, and I wouldn't even know how to rise. I'm not politic enough to rise at a company and, shake the right hands. I was never very good at that. But
me neither, man. Me neither.
No, yeah, because some people have that skill and some people don't. So I would never be able to rise up at a corporate structure and, became made vice VP of anything. I was always had to lead with whatever talent I had. But man, I think we sometimes sell young people a bill of goods about what it's like to work in any creative field. Creative fields are extremely competitive, and you have to really want it to have any chance, I think, of having a really successful career, because the work is hard and it's full of disappointment and it's full of failure, but it's also, you get to go and every day make creative stuff. And that is such a gift. So I'm not bitter about it, but man, do people underestimate what it's like to be successful in a creative field.
Yeah. I can't imagine, even like you were saying, for like a business manager standpoint. I mean, you're just the lightning rod for attention, not outside the company, but especially inside the company, and trying to deal with all the fires. I'm sure that makes it hard to be a creative when you're constantly trying to put fire after fire after fire out. It's like, okay, now I get to think back about game design. And
it's like, I don't necessarily think I had any particular skill in managing people or running a business. If you want to start a company and be the creditor, this was the price I knew that had to be paid. And I just do the best I can so I could spend a fraction of my time doing the stuff I like.
Okay. What are the things that's kind of controversial about now there is no one that could say that you haven't created like truly groundbreaking landmark kind of games. I've really just, especially like you did with like 2007's BioShock, which is just still an excellent game, and the art design that is spectacular, among many spectacular things about that game. The way you had, the narrative kind of game that you broke with Infinite, which kind of led to the many what people now call walking simulator type AAA kind of games. Yours was one of the leaders in kind of starting that trend. So no one can claim that you haven't had big impact, but there are things like, they say, like Ken Levine. He's too quick to throw out assets, or Ken Levine treats game development the way he treats writing. Writing, as a journalist, I can speak to this. Writing it's just having patience and tolerance for everything you're going to throw out, basically.
Right? Yeah. Writing and rewriting. And people who don't rewrite aren't right. Like, if you can get it right the first time, God bless you. You're not me. So yeah, that critique, look, of all the critiques of me, and look, there's plenty are valid. I think that's by far the dumbest, because being able to throw stuff out is complete luxury in game development. And people, if people have worked for me and they don't like that, like, I understand why it's frustrating if stuff thrown out. Like, I have that experience with Doug, right? Where I would spend weeks of time on these pitches for these new games, and he would throw them out, and they would just be gone forever. And I put my heart and soul, and I got art made for it, and I was up all night, but it made me so much better, because the Thing Thief was better than any of those ideas. And we never would have done it if he had said yes to those earlier ideas. So it is a massive luxury, and look, that doesn't mean that every time I decide to throw something out, I'm right. Who knows? You can't really A/B test these things. But I am very willing to throw my own stuff out. I'm very willing to throw other people's stuff out, because at the end of the day, the gamer deserves the best, and it's hard to get there.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of this is also just people who haven't worked in game development trying to cover it. And the gaming press isn't always... I think many of them have good intentions, but they don't. Let me put it this way. In every other field of journalism I've experienced or known people or worked in, there's a level of expertise that you have to have of what you're covering. Game journalism, for whatever reason, because it came from a more fan magazine press, right? So they don't necessarily have the expertise that you would see. Like, if I was a health journalist, disability journalist, I have to know my crap. Right. But if you're a games journalist, you don't necessarily need to know that. And I think sometimes that causes issues, and especially for an audience and gamers, like, they obviously, many gamers love you, Ken, obviously, for good reason. But I mean, they don't really understand why, for example, with Infinite, you're saying, okay, for Finkton, I don't think this Jamaican design, that doesn't quite work, so we're going to throw it out. And to them, they're like, well, why would Ken just throw away all these months of work? Those are perfectly fine. Those perfectly fine buildings and set piece. And why did he just go, that bad Ken? And I think sometimes it's an issue of lack of experience or knowledge to kind of know what's normal.
Sometimes you just have to try things. And sometimes, and as I said, I'm super fortunate that I think I've earned the right to throw stuff out with at least and I'll lose that right the moment the people who are signing the check say, we don't trust you anymore, right? But now I've earned for a while, at least, nothing's permanent, the right to do that. And it's tricky because you could get paralysis too, where you're just like, nothing's good enough. So you have to make sure, you have to sort of check in with yourself and saying, okay, if I'm throwing everything out, how much should be thrown out? There's no good answer to that, because part of the job of being a director, creative director or movie director, creative director in games, movie director in game, in movies or theater, is you are the person who has to sort of keep the vision in your head and make sure everybody's working on the same game. Because literally, especially you get a big team of a couple hundred people, you could have people working on 7 or 8 different games. And it's not that they're trying to work on 7 or 8 different games. You just haven't done a good enough job as a director to communicate to them what that vision is. Or sometimes, we have this term we call the zombie memes, which are ideas about the game that are not true, that just get in people's head and you can't kill no matter how many times you try. You light them on fire, you shoot them in the head, and they're very hard to kill. And I don't know why. Sometimes, then people, look, I get it. Like some people, I had that experience when Doug kept throwing out my stuff. Some people really fall in love with their stuff. And there's nobody who can say it was right or wrong. Like those articles may be completely right. Maybe everything I've ever thrown out was completely wrong, right? I shouldn't have thrown it out, but we'll never know, right? But I do think there is an issue. Look, it's hard if you haven't been a game developer to understand really how decisions are made and how communication happens and how sometimes you get stuff up and it just is, you've done all this work and it just doesn't work. And at that point, you can either go forward or you could say, well, and it's never something I just only ask myself, right? I've got a lot of people around me I trust, and I'll say, hey, Drew, what do you think of this? Zeb, what do you think of this? Or they'll tell me, quite often do. And sometimes we'll disagree vehemently. And sometimes 100 people think we should keep it. And I'm like, no. And sometimes 100 people, including me, think we should not keep it or we should keep it. And then there's one person who is totally against it. And is that person right? You don't really know. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to make those editorial decisions. That's creative director. The only thing I try to keep myself really honest about is my ideas can be just as bad as anybody else's ideas on the team. And I've thrown out so much of my own stuff.
And there probably there's something to say that because of AAA gaming, the size of these teams has gone so big. The size of these market ventures have gone so big. That's a lot of pressure to just lay on one person, or to, as that bomb gets wider of the pyramid, that being at the tippy top of that thing is harder and harder.
Yeah. And a lot of the job is making sure that you don't bring that pressure to the team as much as you can. And I've gotten better over my career to trust. You need to trust your job, but not too much. And that's the tricky part. When things used to fall apart, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm doomed. The company's doomed. Life is doomed. And that would create huge amount of anxiety in me. At some point I said, okay, well, you've done this a few times. You're going to make a ton of mistakes, but you need to trust yourself a reasonable amount and assume that if you screw it up, you're going to find a way to fix it. And because we always have, we've been in so many, I can't tell you how many times the company almost went out of business before we sold the company. We were sued by a publisher because they were mad because we sued them because they stole our IP. And we sued them and won it back, which was incredibly expensive, and we didn't have any money. And they said, well, screw you, we're going to put you out of business. And they sued us for $4 million. And we won that lawsuit too, but you don't win a lawsuit like that. You just survive a lawsuit like that. And so I was running the company doing 3 games while doing this lawsuit and, testifying and being cross-examined. And we were right in both cases, but oh my God, that's the part that people don't see about the job. That's, they don't see I did, I'm not I don't deserve a single violin because my life is awesome, but people really misunderstand what it means to run a business like this. And it's because how could they know? How could they know?
That's kind of a lot of that was part of your reasoning, I'm guessing, for why you said, oh, you went from Irrational Games and you decided to go from that and just go to a much smaller venture, like Ghost.
Well, we had built up so big because the industry blew up, right? Like the kind of game you had to make, like by the time 2013 came around, you couldn't ship what you had shipped in 2007. Same now, right? These games get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not just more money you have to spend on them. You need more people. And, I said before, I never really thought I had any particular talent for managing people. All of a sudden I'm on top of like 200 or 300 people. And I wasn't particularly good at that. So at that point, I decided that the next thing we were going to do was going to be so different that it was going to take a long period of R&D. And I couldn't do that with 300 people staring, waiting, saying, hey, what's next? So at that point, I just said, well, let's leave Irrational, and they can do their thing. But I didn't own the company at that point. So, Take-Two had to decide what they wanted to do with the company. My feeling is they probably should have kept them in business and had them do like the next BioShock. But but that was 2K, that wasn't in their business plan, and they decided not to, and they went a different way. But it turns out so many people from Irrational are now working on that new BioShock. Former Irrational people are now working on that BioShock, including most of the leads, as far as I understand. So they're keeping that legacy going, which is really good. But I didn't think that was right for me, so I had to re-engineer how we made games too, with a much smaller team.
And which has led to where you're about to release, I think, next year. Not a solid release date has been announced as of yet, and I'm recording this December 5th, 2024. But sometime 2025.
We've not announced it. We've not announced a date. I just want to be clear about that.
Okay, I was just reading that from outlets, but that was not from Ghost Story that was saying
it. I'd really like to hold until we're really certain exactly about the exact date, because I've had that experience before where you guess a date and then that create all kinds of other problems.
Okay, but you've gone to select people and you've had them play builds of your game, at least sections of it, and the results I've watched videos of are pretty positive. People seem to be loving what you're doing here with the game Judas.
Yeah, we've been having people play it for years, actually. We've been having both friends and family. There's a thing called friends and family test when you bring in, people from the studio, friends and family, people from the studio, because, they're more, you can trust them. But we've even brought in, we use a firm, and we have huge, QA obviously plays it to death. And we even bring people, we use a firm who brings in what they call like trusted player panels, which are people who they know, and they know what types of games they're interested in. And you get to choose like, okay, what type of gamers do you want to test the game? And they, pay these gamers to play the game. And it's great. You watch them play the game. They don't see you. Like you're basically, well, it used to be like one-way mirrors, but now it's over Zoom. So you can watch them, you record their playthroughs. We do analytics on the playthroughs so we can see like when they weren't having fun, we say, okay, well, why weren't they having fun? Oh, they didn't have any ammo for any of their weapons, or maybe it's something more esoteric. But we've actually had people been playing the game for years, which I think is a great way to develop the game, because then you have a pretty clear understanding of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong.
Yeah. The sci-fi setting looks cool. You're doing, this is because you read a lot of classic sci-fi, especially as a kid. This is like the colony ship, the generation ship, something's gone wrong. Now you, the player, have to go and fix it.
Yep. Well, one of the big things that went wrong, also you caused. Honestly, so like she's a complicated person, a very complicated person, and she's both a victim of the society and then took power and helped destroy the society, and now is picking up the pieces, of that. And she's a fairly dark and complex character. because I don't really like making traditional heroes. I mean, Booker DeWitt is a complicated figure. He, sold his daughter into, for to pay for his gambling debt. And, and Jack is, a 7-year-old man who grew up in a tank, from BioShock 1. None of these are sort of standard heroes. I don't tend to like, even Garrett and Thief was not a particularly heroic character. I tend to write characters who are a little darker.
So from listening to you, it sounds like you, when you're as a gamer for hobbies, you're doing a lot of indie games. You also, though, you like kind of your shooters. You don't seem like someone to me that would like go ahead and like play lots of BioWare games or jump into like a deep 80-hour playthrough on Dragon Age. Does that sound kind of like you?
No, I played a lot of RPGs. I mean, BioWare, I appreciate BioWare games. Thematically, I tend to like things a little bit darker, and I don't like dialogue trees that much. So I tend to shy away from some of those things. Baldur's Gate was something I really thought was incredibly well done, and the writing was great, the characters great. And again, I think the same is true for the BioWare games. Just some things people connect to more, and some people connect.
I bring that up because you're the kind of the innovation you've been working on over the last decade is you kind of want to get because games at the moment for narratives, for storytelling generally, you're kind of put on certain rails. And even games like BioWare, you'll have all kinds of plot flags and you might get different dialogue or interactions, but you're basically playing the same game.
Yep.
You'll see basically the same events in the same order. Beginning is basically the same, ending is basically the same, but you it's flavored so you feel it's different. Or in a game where you have at some point you have some kind of branching path, and then it shoots to one of those. And that's generally where most storytell or narrative games go. But your idea, and I tried really hard to understand, I think I have a hold on it now, is this idea called narrative Legos, which is, from my understanding, because you'll be able to explain this better than I can, but you kind of are taking the micro moment for a gameplay for the player with the enemies or the NPCs or wherever going, and you're using those bits to make little changes in the game, decide what's going to happen next in the gameplay and narrative, which is different. That would be an innovation. And I mean, as much as I love narrative story-driven games, I play so many of them, there does need to be some kind of change in this sort of gameplay.
Yeah, the branching tree structure has been around for a very long time. It's got huge advantages, and you can have incredibly complicated branching trees. I think I never really read up on how Baldur's Gate 3 was made, but I presume it's an incredibly complicated branching tree with a billion conditionals. But managing all of that as this sort of possibility space exponentially grows gets very, very tricky. So we decided to take an approach which is more about building these sort of modular elements that are very handcrafted. But like, what's the smallest element you could build? Like, in Infinite, it was like a level that you'd handcraft and everything would be sort of like glued into place. Where could you build something that the smallest element is like furniture or a texture or a sound effect or a part of a line of dialogue or a sentence out of dialogue? And could the game build spaces, build narrative, build events out of those small elements if you gave it a good rule set? In the same way, like the metaphor is Lego, that there's only, like, originally, but back when I was playing Lego when I was a kid, there's only like 8 or 9 primal pieces you had. You had the 4x4 brick and the 2x6 brick or whatever, and you could build so many things out of those handcrafted primal pieces. So we just had built thousands and thousands and thousands of different primal pieces, whether that's a piece of music or a sound effect or a piece of art or a narrative beat or some dialogue or a monster or some treasure. And we teach the game how to make experiences that are reacting to the player's we track the player's activity and try to react to it on a much lower level than you get out of a branching tree structure.
But this is different than, say, procedural generation, where you're saying, you're telling the game to use some kind of, my words are totally going. You have some kind of engine in place that's going to be like, okay, with this algorithm, we crank out this asset, there are some games that do this and they do it sort of well. Of course, like No Man's Sky is probably the big go-to, I think people would think of. But I play No Man's Sky, and I admit at this point is a very well-polished, well-developed game, but I don't ever feel like I just don't get the same energy off it or the enjoyment that I would do going to one of your games, it's very handcrafted. Is this something that would kind of fill in a niche that's in between two? Or if procedural generation tech got much better in the future, they could use this as an approach they'll go with that?
Not really procedural generation. I want to be clear. It is, I mean, at best, we call it pseudo procedural, which is like the thing you said about No Man's Sky is true, that it's incredibly broad and expansive, but it's also the level of resolution narratively and character is very low, right? Because it's a lot of math, under the hood. And you can do really powerful things with a lot of math, but we don't really use math. The game is constantly querying, okay, what is the player, what is their loadout? What have they done? What decisions have they made? What is their health state? What is this? What is that? And basically, what will be the next interesting thing to happen to the player, right? And it's a lot of rules that we teach, and those rules all define what content is spawned, what types of quests they're getting, what types of encounters they're getting, what do characters say to them, how do other characters feel about them, because we're keeping basically a massive track of like everything they've done through the experience, and we're making rules that say when this has been happening, we react in this kind of way, or if the players, but that can be as complex as it wants to be. So if X, Y, Z is true, but A, B, and C are not, 1, 2, and 3 are not, then do this. And that goes as detailed as you want to make it. And the game is very good at tracking player activity. The tool set is very good at tracking player activity. And if you give it a lot of content to choose to use, it can construct really complex things, because at the end of the day, we don't want people to know that they're not playing like one of our games. It needs to feel as custom and as hand-touched as our previous games, because the gamer is not going to accept a step backwards there, right?
Yeah.
They want to go forward. They don't want to pay the price for our innovation. We have to pay the price for the innovation. And so that's what we've been doing the past 10 years, is trying to pay that price. So by the time we bring it to people, that they don't know it's built in any different way. They just feel the game is responding to them, and they're giving options way beyond what they had before in our games.
Okay, that makes sense. It is a little hard for me, without having played a game that kind of implements this. It was a little hard for me to get my head around it.
The very reason I didn't go out and talk about it before I had other people play it, like the press play it, is because I wanted them to speak about it in a way, because when I talk about it, it sounds very high level, but their experience with it, and you guys should, your audience should totally just go listen to what they said. I think was much more like they didn't know when the non-procedural stuff, because it starts, the very beginning, there's built like the old stuff, and then it opens up into this much more broader choice space. And the goal is that nobody should know that it's transitioning that way. And so far, people can't tell, which is great.
I like the idea of you do a playthrough and you and your buddy have very different experiences.
Yeah.
That will be interesting. I'm kind of used to the internet where you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on in the game. Look up Google. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to see.
We'll have to see it.
Okay, so do I have you for at least 20 more minutes or so?
Yeah, I have till 7:30.
Okay. All right. The world's my oyster.
Half an hour.
Okay, I have a whole bunch of interesting questions that can't really connect or super well into the flow of the conversation, but I'm just curious to know.
Right.
One thing, what's up with BioShock and being adapted? That thing seems, I don't know what it is about BioShock, but it had, there was a movie thing that almost happened that it didn't. And then the latest thing I've heard is Netflix wants to do something. I think there's something this summer that said they were still considering working on a movie about it. Do I have any of this right?
I am completely.
Do people keep you in the loop?
No, I decided not to be, because I think that I really owe to Judas all my attention. And look, having been in Hollywood, I like being in charge of things, and when you're working in Hollywood, you're not. And so I felt I'm not great when I'm not driving the decisions. I don't think I'm great as sort of part of the peanut gallery, so I kind of pulled myself out of it. It's been a long road. I don't know, I don't really know what's going on with it, but I decided at one point it's just better for me not to be involved. But there are people working on BioShock 4 are involved in it, and I'm sure I know those guys, and I'm sure they're going to give it attention, but it's just something I've decided to step back from.
Yeah. Speaking as someone with ADHD, I have a very difficult time working on more than one project at the same time. it's one of my faults. So I can understand that.
It can be difficult. Like, I actually wrote a draft for a BioShock movie while I was making Judas at one point, and then I realized, like, I can't just divide my attention like this. And so that draft went nowhere. But I decided, like, I can't do two jobs at once.
Okay. People have asked about BioShock, considering that their objectivism is actually pretty well played. It's you're not really, obviously there's a little bit of a spoofing, but it's actually a pretty decent portrayal of Lovecraftian ideas. So people have wondered, where do you fall? Not politically, like which party, but ideologically. Are you someone that lives closer to Rand? Are you someone that maybe you're living closer, maybe the ideas espoused in one of your other works?
I'm much more a buffet type guy. Like, I believe in outcomes, not ideologies, So I'll see what's working, and I just try to call balls and strikes. So, when with objectivism, I had read a few Rand books, and I found some of her ideas really compelling. Like, she has, this notion that altruism is bad, right? And the reason she thinks that is because she thinks the most good will come out of people focusing their entire attention on building their own things, and people benefit from that. It's, it's basically descended from Adam Smith, who said, the baker doesn't feed people by trying to help people. He feeds them because he sells them the bread, and then he, for his own interests. And so there is, some clearly markets can show that people working their own interests can create great outcomes for not just them, but for other people. I believe in non-zero sum games, if you know the game theory term, where, we're not just competing over one pie. We can make a bigger pie by working together, and we'll both get more pie. So there's some of Rand in that. I think, like a lot of ideologies, she took it to an extreme, and but that's happened. So with ideologies, and so I just, with BioShock, I was like, I think this is a really interesting ideology, but I want to, in her books, she's able to make up all the rules. So there were things that I thought were fairly unrealistic. Like, she'd make these very idealized characters, like the guy in the Fountainhead, and, the guys who go to Galt's Gulch. And I said, well, what if you had a character who was, I didn't want to like diss on Rand at all. That was not my interest. It was like, what if I just try to tell an honest story if somebody really felt this way, and what would be the problems they'd run into, and how would they deal with it? And could they change the rigidity of their ideology once the facts on the ground changed? That was what interested me, is that story of Ryan. Some of my favorite audiologues in that game were he's seeing things going to hell, and he almost gets it at one point. Like, maybe I need to change course, but then he does this sort of, well, no, the kids must be wrong moment. And that wasn't because I wanted to make Ryan to be a fool. I think Ryan is obviously a very impressive, powerful figure, but he can't see the forest for the trees, because he develops these ideas, and those become reality for him, and he's unable to sort of move away from it when reality changes.
I like the narrative cohesion. I hate it in a story where there's some kind of philosophy at play, and then at the very last minute, the author's like, well, I don't want people to think I'm bad, so then they pull off. And I'm like, oh, you're so close. Just,
I don't have, like, my idea as the world changes, and, like, sometimes you need a wartime concierge, The Godfather, you need a peacetime concierge or a wartime concierge. Like, as life changes, you need different strategies for dealing with life. As you're younger, you have certain strategies. And so you meet somebody and fall in love and start a family, then you have different strategies. When you're starting out as a company, you have different strategies. And when you're more established, I don't believe in rigid, I never really was a big fan of rigid ideologies. So I just liked, but I'm fascinated by them. And, maybe, so I mean, it's weird. I decided at some point, like, let's just make games where we explore various ideologies. And pretty much all the big games I've made, there's always been a bit of an exploration of various types of ideologies.
Well, I love it, because as a sci-fi nerd and a history nerd, I really enjoy playing with those ideas. It's like, well, what happens if Art Deco was allowed to flourish? Like, what would that look like? Or Infinite. I think I've heard you're a fan of the book The Devil in the White City. You do the 1893 World's Fair. That's what the world of Infinite looks like. I'm just, that always jazzes.
I read that book, and it was so, I just reread it, actually. I was so blown away. Yeah, if I hadn't read that book, that I probably Infinite wouldn't have happened. It was totally inspirational. And they've been trying to make a movie of that forever, but it's almost impossible to film because it's basically two different stories completely. One about a serial killer, one about a World's Fair.
I love that architecture, especially there at the end of the 19th century. You're going into the end of Victorian, early Edwardian.
Yeah.
Fascinating world. Fascinating.
I also love, I mean, to get to play in those, to take those beautiful architectural movements and be able to make, games out of them. It's just, I'm so lucky every day. I'll never say I'm not lucky just to get to play around in those spaces, ideologies, architecture, art, movies, music, everything.
I wish there were more games that did play a bit more with history. I guess Fallout sort of does. It's kind of a modern not idolized, but like a stereotypical look of like culture, 1940s, 1950s, Frozen. And I guess you have RTS games, but there's not a lot of history really outside that. I don't know. Maybe currently people are like, this isn't something that's going to move the mass market.
Well, it's also people are making, like, I think the games industry tends to draw a lot of people who read and consume a lot of fantasy and science fiction. And I actually never read a ton of science fiction when I was a kid. I was mostly reading history, and I liked sci-fi movies a lot, but I didn't read a lot of sci-fi books, and I never even had read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. So I didn't really read any fantasy, though I love fantasy settings. Like I love D&D and all that stuff, but I sort of was much more interested. Well, that's not entirely true, but one of my, probably the biggest inspiration, another huge inspiration with the games was seeing this movie and reading the book Logan's Run when I was a kid. That was the first dystopian story I ever saw, and that blew me away. And, I love Orwell, and I love, Huxley and people like that. But I think we sort of make things based upon our interests, and my interests have tended to be, people who love JRPGs are going to make kind of JRPG kind of games. I tend to like all this weird eclectic stuff, and I just like take whatever I'm obsessed with at that time. I just like, I want to put it in the game because I know at least if I love it, there's a chance I can make other people love it. And I especially like taking things that aren't super popular, like Art Deco or Objectivism, or even when I made Freedom Force, these superhero games. Superheroes weren't very popular back then. This is this is around 2000. And like, especially in Europe, there's no MCU, and they were very, they were viewed as very sort of weird and nerdy. But I had this huge passion for the Silver Age of comics, and I just wanted to share that passion with people. And that's pretty much what I'm always doing. I'm just sharing things I'm super passionate about. But I also try to understand that you have to sort of invite people in. You can't just be like, here's what I'm passionate. You have to know everything about Art Deco to appreciate this game. You sort of give them a nice, easy ramp into the period of music, the period of politics, the period of art. But you kind of have to chew it up a little bit for them so it's more digestible if it's something they're not familiar with.
Yeah. For Infinite, you do. I love the song remixes you do, where it's like, what would happen if Girls Want to Have Fun was written in 1912, and I just love that kind of thing. How did that come together, and how did you get the rights to that? That's gotta be a dicey thing.
I'll talk about the most important thing you said that was wrong there was that I do it. I had the idea to do the music, but then I was like, hey, Jim Bonney, music director, go make this happen. And I chose some of the songs, but he found a group called, and they're very, very popular now, called, oh fuck, why am I forgetting? Jukebox. Oh no, why am I forgetting? He's going to kill me. Scott Bradley, Postmodern Jukebox. And they do, if you go to their webpage, if you go to their YouTube channel, they're hugely popular now. This is what they do. They take modern songs, they do them in old styles. So we did a combination of them and some other people and made a bunch of these songs. Obviously we found a barbershop quartet. Jim found a barbershop quartet to do two. We found one first and they weren't quite right. And he probably was furious at me when I said, that's not the right barbershop. And he had to go find another barbershop. Speaking of throwing things out. And there wasn't like anything was wrong with the first group. I just knew exactly the sound I wanted in that thing, but I had no idea how to create it because I'm not a musician. I took one semester of music theory and almost failed. Jim worked really hard. He's also music director on Judas as well. We just found some great people, and that idea seemed to work, and people loved it.
Because they're covers, does your company still have to go all the way to try to make deals with the record companies?
It's complicated and expensive and time consuming. Like you'll pay, I don't know if I can say how much it is, but not cheap. So when you want to cover a song and you're a musician, you don't have to make any arrangement with somebody. You just basically have to pay a fee to ASCAP, which is it's a licensing company, and they pay the fees out to the composers. But if you want a license for a game, it's expensive. You have to pay for both what they call the mechanicals, which are the composition, and the performance, if you want to use the performance as well. So when we use Girls Who Want to Have Fun, I don't think we had the original Cyndi Lauper, so we just had we paid the composer, and then we found musicians, like Postmodern Jukebox, to make that performance. You got to pay them to do that, but it's expensive. But the hardest part is not the money. It's they often say no because, especially with older songs, they don't know. They hear first person shooter sometimes. They're like, oh, that's bad. Especially if people in there, or they just don't understand it at all. Sometimes some of the songs, the rights holders are dead, and their family, their kids are 70 or 80, and and they're making these decisions, and they just don't know. So, and they don't often want to get on the phone and talk about it, and because you can tell them what your particular vision is. So you get rejected a fair amount for that, or it comes back and sometimes you ask for a song and you come back and say, oh, that's $500,000. And you're like, I can't pay $500,000 for a song in the game. So we try to find songs that quite often aren't as super well known or aren't the most popular thing. Like you try to license a Zeppelin song or something. It's like, good luck. It's hard to get in. You're going to pay, insane amounts of money for it. So you have to choose carefully.
Oh, that's interesting. I know that for like a company like even Rockstar, that's a problem with republishing the GTA games. And that they're like, okay, so if we're going to release this game again, we're going to have to get rid of this track and that track and this track.
Yeah, that's why they have the ability to remove those songs, and it's not because a license runs out, and that could be a problem too. So yeah, the licensing songs in games is way more complicated than I think it should be, because I think part of it's just there's a general prejudice against games just because it's new and people, don't understand. I've seen over time, when I started in Hollywood, nobody, even when we first started talking about a BioShock movie, just the executives didn't know anything about games. So they always say, well, my son likes this. Now you've had people in that world who grew up playing games. So it's much easier. You have people at Netflix who are like, oh yeah, I played BioShock when I was 15, and they're executive now at Netflix. So it's getting easier because they at least understand the medium, but back in the day, they just didn't really understand it at all. So they were nervous about licensing because they didn't know what they were getting into.
Yeah. And, I was kind of hard on the games press earlier because they are easy to bully. But in their defense, and Gene Park, when he was on my show a few episodes back, I love Gene. More people should have watched that. If you haven't seen it, go watch it.
He did.
He made this part that it's really hard to get other parts of media and other industries to think of games as a serious medium, like a popular medium, even though games currently they eat the lunch of every other form of entertainment. I mean, it's just games and it's like everything else.
I actually think this is a part of the reason, game journalism kind of changed from more enthusiasts to about the time BioShock came out. Well, I think one thing I think the games journalists are really excited about BioShock because I think there are some games journalists, not all by any stretch of the imagination, and it's better now than it used to be, especially when games were sort of more fringe. They were kind of embarrassed to say they were in video games because there wasn't a lot of prestige attached to it, right? It was kind of like, oh, video games. I remember when I was, before I met my wife and I was dating and people asked me what I did. I said, oh, I run a video games company. They're like, okay, that's great. And I think that games journalists became more political because it added more, they felt they were involved in something bigger, and more important than just games. And I never had that feeling. I always was so excited to be in games, and I was always super proud of it and super excited. I couldn't imagine anything better. And I never felt they were bad because games saved me when I was a kid. They were my friend. My Atari 800 was my Atari 2600 was my only friend, and it kept me company, and it was there for me. And so I always felt such a kinship with games. But I think a lot of journalists, they want to be doing bigger things, bigger things. And so they want to write about studio culture, and they want to write about, political themes in games and stuff like that. And I think you get to this period, which I saw a few years ago, where they would sort of torment poor developers and say, is your game's political, isn't it? And the poor developer who wasn't really thinking politically would be like, no, it's not. But it is because, and my games have always pretty much been political, and I never denied that. But I think there's a difference between making games that are political and making games that are political screeds. And games that deal with politics, BioShock games deal with politics, Judas deals with politics, System Shock 2 dealt with politics, even Thief to some degree. There were, different political movements in the city. The church and the pagan movement were, very different political views on the world. But most games aren't. And you can say all art is political, but if you say all art is political, then no art's political, right? Because it becomes meaningless. There are games that are very specifically political, and I'm never going to pretend that the stuff I do doesn't have a valence to it, though it doesn't particularly necessarily have an ideology. Certainly, we're just exploring those themes. And I think that it was important for some journalists that games be political because they wanted to say, I'm involved in political journalism. And not all games are. Mario, yeah, you could say Mario's got a political valence, but you're kind of really wasting your time. And I've read a lot of, academic papers too, where, they want to sometimes find something in games that aren't there. Like even the Far Cry games, which are ostensibly politically related, they don't really have a political point of view. Like you're in the last game, you're in Cuba, and there's like, you've got a best friend who's an alligator who's following you around. It is sort of, it's sort of set in a Cuban style place, but it doesn't really deal with any of the real meaningful issues of that kind of society. And I don't think they were trying to, but I think people want to hold their feet to the fire like they are making something super political, and it's not always the case. But feel free to come after all journalists. Feel free to come after me on political topics because I'm working in that space.
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't say it; he said it. So,
well, I don't mind. Like I expect people to come. I've had once you become I used to be. Before you become successful, people tend to like you a lot more than once you do. And I'm sure, there are other reasons as well, but I don't mind journalists, like I used to be more nervous about it, but I'm kind of looking forward to talking about and having people challenge me. I don't mind it at all.
No, I agree. And I think art is going to have some kind of intellectual value. And if people find the art engaging, they want to engage with that, means discussing the themes they're working through. But that's different than saying, oh, and this means X or Y for policy in, in whatever country you're living. But that's a harder conversation to have, and that's not quite as sexy to sell. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, you also remember, like sometimes like people say, well, Booker said this in the game, so that means Ken thinks this. I'm like, Booker's a very complicated, messed up person. I don't know share all of his views. I didn't sell my daughter, I didn't sell my daughter to pay off my gambling debts either, but he's got his flaws, I've got mine. But they're all characters in a game, and I'm really interested in having the characters take on various points of views and having them go at each other, right? Having them have the debate. I don't post politically online because I don't really want people to know my politics because it gets in the way of them coming to the game fresh.
That's fair. And I don't think you should have to be political. I think those are two separate spheres mostly. And if you do want to, that's fine, but no one should feel like they have to. That's my point of view anyways. So I'm just I have so many things I could ask you, okay, just like real quick. So at the end of Infinite, the way it is implied is that all the versions of possible Elizabeth and Booker have been deleted down to just one Elizabeth, which you play in Burial Sea. Is that certain? Are there not like other multiverses out there with Elizabeths, or is it in Infinite? No, just the one. You get just the one, and then
I'm going to give you the most cursed answer to this, which is I'm not going to answer it because I'm not a big authorial intent guy. At the end of the day, you got to play the game, you got to experience it, and you got to come to your conclusions about what that is. So I'd never answer that question because I kind of feel it collapses it, to use the many worlds, it collapses it collapses the realities down to a single one. And when you open that box and you see the cat inside or not inside, and I'd rather games are a great thing where all art is open to interpretation. And I'm not gonna be around one day, and hopefully, if I'm lucky, people still. Well, I'll be dead, but if my estate is lucky, people will still be playing the games, and they could, finding new things in them that rather than slavishly trying to find what I found in them.
Okay, last question.
Yep.
So you were a theater kid. Mm-hmm. I was not. There is a feeling, if you've listened to my show, there is a feeling that the problems of gaming today is that theater kids invaded and they took over the nerd kid's space. Being a theater kid and a nerd, you're like both. You're from both worlds. You have you understand both tribes in this fiercely hotted gaming debate. What do you think of this? Is there any truth to this, or is this just like reverse bullying?
It's not okay. Well, I don't think nobody owns anything, right? And forms change. I think that I very much welcome like Games from Gone Home came along because I thought it was great. I think the more games, the more types of games, the better. And the people who said those aren't games, I think they're wrong in the sense that, well, if people play them and enjoy them, who's to say what's a game and what isn't? I do think that movement to some degree then became gatekeepers themselves and said, well, you can't have these types of games. You can't have this in a game. You can't have this type of presentation of a certain gender, in a game, or you can't have this. Where I like to see everything. I want to see the broadest possible scope of things that artists can do. I think if theater is way more unchanged, like theater is still very narrow in terms of what types of things it takes on and politics takes on and the approach it takes on. And I think it could benefit from more sort of creative diversity in the space, where games have benefited massively from that. And I'm always going to be somebody to say, let's have the most voices here with the most freedom. And I think that's not always a popular opinion, but I think it should be. And I think that I think that we don't need a world where somebody's telling other people what type of game they should or shouldn't make. And I think we'll all benefit from that freedom. But yeah, there was definitely a certain certain games can feel very theater kiddie. And I say this as an old theater kid, but there's a certain aesthetic in theater which can be a bit precious, and I think some games could be like that, and that's great. I think you can get monolithic about certain approaches, and theater right now is a bit I'm not super interested in theater because it's very much it can be very one note theater, and I don't see the experimentation. Like I tend to like people like Sondheim, right, who's really experimenting with the form. And you don't see that kind of experimentation as much anymore. And it's also become very celebrity driven, where the only way a show can open if there's some big celebrity, and straight plays aren't very popular. So I do think you can have cultures that become dominant, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have theater. We should have tons of theater kids in games, but we should have also tons of non-theater kids in games, and everybody should be able to make their stuff without anybody else telling them what they should be making.
I agree. That is a good answer. That is what we should all hope for. All the kids, whoever wants to show up at D&D night, you're welcome. Just don't be bossing. Don't be trying to bully and boss each other around. Okay,
But there's definitely parts of the tradition. Like I remember when D&D used to be a much darker, more. I remember the monster manual had violent, nude monsters and and violence and much darker themes, and I thought that was great but I also think if people want a much more sanitized version, a much more friendly version, that's great too. The great thing about paper games is you're not bound in the same way you are with a video game to play a certain way, because you get the rules and you do whatever you want with them. I think the same with games. I believe gamers should be. I love that games are so moddable now. That's why I don't like putting my own authorial intent down. I think you buy the game and it's your game. And you should be able to think of it or do with it whatever you want. And that's always been my view with art.
All right. Well, Ken, sir, it has been an honor. Thank you so much for coming on the show, for being willing to list the show, come on the show, seek it out. I love your games. I love your attitude. It is very refreshing. I wish you and your company and the game Judas, whenever it's ready, that it all works out spectacular, as I think it will.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I really enjoyed the question. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for everyone for taking the time to watch CultureScape this week. As always, the support is appreciated. The show isn't possible without the help of my editor, Chris, who makes me look way more competent than I actually am. And of course, you, the wonderful audience. That's why I do this. that you guys have been turning out to watch the show and provide such great feedback has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Until next time, my friends, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang! If you are a fan of CultureScape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can! By joining the CultureScape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor Chris as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love CultureScape, then come join us today on Patreon.